Hello again. Um, let's see if we can get past the technical difficulties this time. So, anyone who's here, help me do troubleshooting and let's do an audio check. And let's also do a chat box check. So, I'm going to type in first. Hello. If you can see my writing and hear my voice, please let me know. Welcome back, and I apologize for technical difficulties. Once I figure out how to delete the short-lived live, I will. I've never had to delete anything on YouTube before. Our YouTube admin usually handles YouTube for me, so I will have to figure out how to delete that live that was really not alive. For information as to what happened, my electricity went out. It blinked once, it went out, it came back, and then it blinked off second time and it went out. For those who wonder where I live in the good old USFA in Texas, where we have ERCOT, the system that does not work when it's too cold, and the system that apparently cannot work in the summer either. So yes, my electricity is not a guarantee. And with that, obviously, the internet. So I will highly apologize to you if you are a Texan and you live in Texas. Send letters to your legislators and tell them that ERCOT needs to do better. I see you, I hear your voice, and I read your comment. Excellent. So we're going to get started. I know exactly where we left off because I managed to communicate that much with you before we got lost. So I'm pulling up the screenshot, which was very kindly shared by one of your fellow VIPs. So I've got that pulled up, but we were stuck where we were discussing restrictions, job restrictions. That's where we were stuck. So here goes. Job restrictions. Job restrictions are extremely related to what a person's profession is, as well as are the job restrictions being asked for particular types of indictments. So indictments that are more heinous in nature ask for serious types of job restrictions. Let me give you examples of heinous crimes to have a good idea of what they are, what heinous entails. Murder, rape, kidnapping, gang rape, in South Korea, treason. I would assume in most countries, treason would be also considered something like that, terrorist act. These types of crimes are heinous in nature, the severity of which are at such a level that restrictions must be asked for. For crimes that are related to murder, restrictions may be very, very severe when it comes to job restrictions. For crimes that are related to things such as, and I want to make sure we understand, these particular charges have nothing to do with SR's case, but giving you examples of how we decide what the restrictions are related to. If they're related to something such as rape, gang rape, sexual assault, then the restrictions would be very particular. The restrictions in the jobs would limit the persons who's been convicted, their ability to be in contact with potential victims. For instance, if someone's been convicted for raping a child or child molestation, their job restrictions would be you cannot work with children. sometimes, and it's very disturbing. And this doesn't just happen in the United States, but it's happened in South Korea too. It just goes to show that sometimes human nature, perhaps, is super messed up. Sometimes priests, people who we place such trust in, end up being child molesters. In those cases, job restrictions would mean they won't be able to become priests anymore. They lose that job, that respectability, that place of trust gets taken away, and they will never be able to work in any kind of jobs where children are concerned. So the examples I'm giving are there to understand what is considered heinous and how specific types of crime would have specific restrictions. In terms of SR, his crimes are not heinous in nature. However, uh, his restrictions will still be related to his profession. Even though he's retired, he was professionally an entertainer. So SR's restriction to jobs would be heavily um, based on the fact that he did several different types of entertainment for a living. Um, how much will be restricted depends on the discretion of the judge. It also depends on what he's found guilty of. If he's found guilty of simply, say, embezzlement, then it might have nothing to do with his entertainment career. Instead, they might say he cannot work as, I don't know, a financial advisor. He cannot work as a CEO. So if it's embezzlement, then entertainment doesn't really fall into that. But if it's for, say, the prostitution mediation, the sharing of that one photo, which the defense has repeatedly said was not taken with a camera by the defendant, but was actually a promotional picture. If it's one of those, then it is more likely to be related to his entertainment career. So if that gives you a decent idea of how, depending on what his indictment is and which one of those indictments gets a conviction, will determine what his job restrictions end up becoming in which areas. So there is a possibility for entertainment if it's related to particular types. There's a possibility that it's instead related to his job as a business person if it's related to the white collar charges. So also, because his particular list of indictments, none of them are heinous in nature, I would also say that these restrictions will have a time frame, a limit to them. So it could be anything from a few months to a year or a few years. So it should not be perpetual. For instance, if someone is a doctor and commits these crimes, they might have a job restriction in practicing medicine. It might be, again, a short one for months to a couple of years. Now, if a doctor commits a heinous crime, then that doctor completely loses his license to practice and will never be able to practice. But if SR was a doctor and it's the exact same levels of crimes that we're looking at right now, it would definitely not be considered heinous. He would not be losing a license forever. Instead, it would be restricted for a particular time period in which he wouldn't be able to practice medicine. Similar for lawyers. But a little bit higher complications for lawyers because lawyers are held to actually a higher standard when we are convicted of crimes, because lawyers, whether you're a prosecutor or you're a defense, your job is to uphold the law. That is literally your job, to uphold the law. You're officers of the law. You're officers of the court. You have a sworn duty. So when you break your duty and commit a crime, the level of responsibility and liability you hold is much greater than what a normal citizen does, because you've broken a sacred trust that has been placed upon you in your profession. One of the things that I tell my students, my first year students, when they come in, is being a lawyer is not a job. When you leave the office, you don't stop becoming a lawyer. You might stop practicing law, but you're still a lawyer. You still live by the same ethical standards that you do when you're inside that office. So hopefully that gives you an idea of how job restrictions will be very specific to the exact type of indictment he gets convicted for. Obviously, if he doesn't get convicted for the major ones, such as the prostitution mediation, the embezzlements, if it's not related to those, then the job restrictions won't be a big factor and a worry anymore. Let's see here. Is that a question? So he will have a job restriction as a fact. If he is convicted for certain amounts of things, the job restriction has been asked for, and it's going to be up to the judge to decide if they're going to grant it. So it's not for a fact, meaning it's not 100% fixed. It's just one of the things the prosecution has asked, just like the 5-year sentencing. Even if the judge finds him guilty on things, there is no guarantee that the judge is going to give the prosecution everything they want. They might not give the 5 years. They might not give all the job restrictions. But if they do decide to give job restrictions because he's been found guilty on these, they're definitely going to look at which one did I find him guilty on, and how dangerous is it for them to continue working in that particular field. If I find them guilty for white-collar crime, how dangerous is to let him near money and make decisions related to money. If I find him guilty for prostitution mediation, how dangerous is it to let him continue working as an entertainer? Someone in South Korea who's an entertainer is considered a public figure and is considered someone who has to be held morally above everyone else in society. How high is it that we punish them in that particular fashion? This is the confusion part of a South Korean society and their legal system, where they're held morally liable at such a high rate for having been a public figure. That's comes straight out of the teachings of Confucius and some of the values that were held from eons ago. So if that is the case, again, as I said, it's going to all come down to exact indictment, exact verdict for that indictment, and then the judgment of the judge. So there is no 100% guarantee that the job restrictions will happen, but if it does, that's how they're going to do it. Please save this. I will do my best to save it. We've been having technical difficulties, so I'm going to knock on my wood right here and hope that no more technical difficulties and it saves well. Also, if we have any technical difficulties at this point, I actually now have my cell phone near me. I will be checking my IGDM. So in case something happens, I will be checking this. But let's again hope it doesn't. What about the revelation and notification of personal information? Tell me a little bit more about what you mean, what about. I think I know what you mean about what about, but I want to again make sure that I'm answering your exact question and not assuming something and answering it on my own, because assumptions can lead me to giving you the incorrect answer. or slightly misguided answer. So I'm going to let you type that up in slightly more detail or rephrase it a little bit. Exactly what do you mean by what about? Okay, what about the revelation and notification of personal information? Like, what would this mean for him? That makes a lot of sense, and it's kind of related to what I thought you meant. Glad I clarified. Give me a tiny second. I'm going to tell you what that means. Okay, before I tell you what it means, let me tell you how they were able to ask for that particular um, consequence. Remember how I talked about prostitution and prostitution mediation and the shooting of the picture? All these three things are not heinous. Let me repeat myself in case anyone goes back and goes, heinous crimes, heinous crimes. All three are not heinous. But in that book of law, all crimes are divided into subcategories under one major category, like chapters. There's a chapter of sexual crimes related to sex. And that's a big chapter. So think about it as a textbook with a chapter. Under that chapter, there are all these crimes. Some are absolutely heinous. Rape, gang rape, child molestation, sexual assault, gang-related violence, and sexual assault. I mean, I could go on with the amount of heinous crimes that exist within that chapter. But that chapter also has some incredibly less offensive things that in some countries are not crimes, like prostitution and prostitution mediation. There are jurisdictions, legal jurisdictions in this world, and not in backward places. I'm talking about in many European and other developed countries, as well as some developing countries, where prostitution and prostitution mediation are not crimes. They're either legal or they're decriminalized. I tend to be in favor of both of those options and not in favor of the option where they're criminalized. So keep that in mind, but it exists in that same chapter. What else is in that chapter that I believe is really not a criminal offense? Obscene materials is some of the stuff in there. So obscene materials doesn't necessarily even have to do with a naked body. For those who have not followed me since the beginning of this case, you probably don't know that obscene materials can be a very racy novel. So you happen to be a literature professor or an author, and you write a racy novel that has juicy sex scenes in them, and you're being slightly explicit there. That's an obscene material. In fact, in South Korea, a poor professor who wrote a rather racy book with quite explicit details of sexual activity. Again, it was a book, it was a story, it was a novel. He was a professor. Not only was he arrested, indicted, convicted, let me say this, convicted, he lost his respect in society. The face was lost. And unfortunately, he lost his job as a professor. Many years later, he thought he was going to be able to teach again, but it didn't work out. There was too much stigma against him due to that one novel he wrote. It wasn't considered a work of art. It was considered obscene, and he was considered to have committed something that fell under a sexual offense, which led him to committing suicide. The reason why I'm mentioning this is because whenever something, even if it's something as absurd as writing a novel with lots of sex scenes or having a female who is like the guys, you know, when I said like the guys, I mean men are expected to be womanizers. If they are, they're like James Bond, 007. If women are like that, then women's are whores. They're loose. They're the words that people use are just, in my opinion, sexist and belong in the 50s, not in 2021. But anywho's, the particular professor wrote about a female character who is racy. So when you have these minor violations that should not even be crimes, uh, inside the statute, in that chapter, that means if you're found guilty of one of these offenses, which are more minor in nature, and the prosecution knows they're minor in nature, the judge knows it's minor in nature, the public has no clue, really. But the defense also knows it's minor in nature, even though everybody in that room who matters legally know it's minor in nature because it's written into law in that chapter. Then all the punishments that you can legally ask for those crimes in that chapter also apply to the minor ones. And one of the things that you can ask for is to give the details, your personal details. In America, and this is a slightly more concerning example because it's a lot more serious, but in America there is the offender list, the sexual offender list, or the child molester lists, these type of lists. Now, in South Korea, it's not going to be quite the same, but for you to get the idea of what's taking place is because it falls in that same chapter, regardless of how much more minor it is, they can now ask to reveal his personal information, and that will then become public record. So if people wanted to find out if SR, who he is, if he's committed sexual related offenses, they will be able to find it out if he is found guilty on one of those 3 indictments that fall under that sex chapter. And you're not going to want to like it. In fact, I don't like it, but that's what's allowed. So tell me if that answered your question. I'm going to skip to the top and read some of the questions/comments while you type, and then I'll come back to the bottom. Okay, I see someone is just, I may just add as a side point that I'm reading the Criminal Act Law of Korea now, Articles 52 to 58 take on determination of punishment. Excellent. I'm glad that many of you are going to the primary source. I know that over the couple of years, many of you have actually gone to the primary source. One of the things that I will tell you to do as you're finding the primary source, also look to see when the latest revisions were done, because there have been several revisions over the years. So look to see when your revisions were done. Make sure they've been more recent, and that way you know you're on the latest, or at least the close to the latest version. And again, it's important because South Korean law is codified. Anytime something changes, it gets rewritten and put into it. So check the dates as you're doing this. Excellent primary source use. Good job. Like, what would it mean for him? Okay, I answered that one. Please save. I was waiting on IG and missed everything you said. Now, I'm really hoping that you caught this second part. I will definitely save again, knocking on wood. Not that superstitious, but with so much of problems with our electricity going off and then the internet, again, we're gonna just knock on that wood. Um, I practice law in South Korea, so I've most definitely read it, including the penal code, the procedure, and a billion other codes that are written into law. So if you're talking to me specifically, you don't need to share the link. However, if you would like to share the link for your fellow VIPs, absolutely go do it for your fellow VIPs. I have more than enough legal paperwork from my years of practice there. So thank you, but I don't need them. But for them, go ahead. Let any of them see the link if you would like to share it. Yes, information will then be accessible to the public. That is what it means. Hopefully, that kind of made sense. I'm going to again go to the bottom and see. You mean that he was found guilty of a sex crime? This is where your wording gets super tricky. I did not understand what you mean by his personal info. So, personal information for him is going to include something like his real given name, where does he live? That's what I mean. And yes, he will be found guilty of a sex crime if he is indicted on anything that belongs in that chapter: prostitution, mediation, the sharing of the obscene material, which they're calling shooting of the picture. Even though they're minor, they belong under the chapter titled sex. And that's why they can ask to have that personal information. Um, and that's why, if someone wants to, they can technically say he is a sex offender. That doesn't mean he's a heinous crime offender. They can say this of someone who urinates in public, who takes off their clothes on streaks. Uh, Again, as I'm saying, there's one big chapter under which there's many, many smaller things. Okay, even though the smaller, more minor things exist, they can still be asked, the prosecutor can still ask for the same restrictions, including his personal information. And I will remind you the last time, asking does not equal to receiving. Asking doesn't equal to receiving, meaning that unless he's found guilty on those three particular charges, you're not going to have to worry at all. And if he is found guilty on those particular charges, then it will again fall under the discretion of the judge to decide if he will allow those or he will not allow those. So it's going to be very, very important what happens at that point. Not too concerning as aggravated assault for me, but definitely a concern that I would add to the list of things that if there are anything in this case to think about consequences wise, one of those, definitely. Definitely, that's one of the consequences that you want to be wary of and aware of. Um, okay. Yes, it is his address and stuff, but it's also what he's been convicted of. So, address, name, address, what his criminal record is. Not all the details, but yeah, he's been convicted of A, B, C type of deal. But that's what they're kind of asking. I'm scared that revealing of info, the media is going to have several field days if that happens. Uh, let's hope it doesn't. As I said, as far as consequences go, if the results are unfavorable, that's definitely something to be very, 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 very of. Um, if you are a VIP and we come to this eventuality, and again, if the big word if, because it might not happen, if we come to that eventuality, it's going to be more important then than ever before that when you speak in particulars, in exact details about each of the indictment. If someone suggests that he is a criminal, don't say no, he's not. Instead, discuss what was he convicted for? What type of offense was it? Was it a minor offense? Was it a major offense? If it happens to be a white collar crime, if it falls under the chapter of sex crimes, were those serious offenses that are heinous in nature, or were they minor offenses such as streaking, writing a racy novel, or paying for sex, which he himself did not do, by the way. But distinguish between the exact indictments and the nature of those particular criminal indictment. It's going to be so important if you ever reach that eventuality that we stop talking in generals and we start talking in exact particulars. I'm sorry, I missed a word on my sentence. If. Yes, if. Exactly. Well said. That if is important. So you mean that if he's found guilty. Okay, so if he's found guilty, yes. If the if happens, what you say makes complete sense. And yes, it's a concern if you get to that eventuality. It seems that all of our things have the big if on it. We don't know if the big ifs are ever going to come true until the actual verdict comes out. That also means that IG can delete his account. I don't know if I should address this one publicly or not, because that's going to give ammunition, but I will go ahead and do so since it's already here. So for IG to delete a person's account, a couple of things needs to happen. Somebody needs to first tell them that there is someone who's considered A, B, or C who has an account. After that is done, IG will look for proof of this eventuality, and if they find it, then it can happen. The reason why I don't think it's smart to spend too much of public time speaking about this is you don't really want to give ammunition to people who are going to want to send IG false reports or even misleading reports in case something does happen. So I would definitely not spend most of our time discussing that eventuality. I'll finish it at that. Was this done for other celebrities convicted of sex crimes? I honestly don't follow celebrities. Other than those who belong to the YG family, I grew up on YG family. So they're the only ones that I've paid much attention to. I have no idea what happened to JJY's channels or what his channels were at all. No idea whatsoever if they even existed on Instagram or Twitter or YouTube. No idea. So unfortunately, I am not qualified to answer that one. And yes, for a disclaimer, I am a YG stan in that sense since I grew up with YG family. But if you'll notice when and Big Bang is my bias, but you will notice when I talk about the law, I try to stick to the law and I try to keep most of my personal opinions away. You'll really notice that from when I was speaking in my Saba Legal Live earlier today. I tried to stay firmly on the legal topic and took myself out of the equation. I need to know right about now if you can still hear me and if you can still see my typing. All right. Good news is you guys can still hear me. The reason why I'm asking you that is because um, my lights are flickering again. ERCOT is having a tough time. Who in Texas is using the electricity at 2 a.m. in the morning that ERCOT cannot handle? I don't know, but there is ERCOT messing with my electricity again. Um, all right, so I'm going to go continue with the questions because I want to make sure I answer as many of the substantial questions as I can. By substantial, I mean material ones, the ones that are super important. The minor ones, I might skip a little bit because my electricity is unreliable right now. And if it goes off, I might lose connection a third time. Um, Hello, new subscriber. Love your content. Well, welcome. I am the lead lawyer for VLM, and obviously the face of the place. I talk, and I'm doing this in the middle of the night. It's 2 a.m., so forgive me for being in my bedroom and not in formal wear. I don't know if this is a stupid question, but could he be charged for a position of photos of other members, like TOP in the shower? Um, no, no. That would not be a thing that he can be charged with. In this particular instance, that's not also one of my concern. But no, not a stupid question. Um, a little funny, maybe a little weird question to ask, but given the fact that we've been dealing with a circus show, and I keep on using the word bizarre to describe this, uh, I would say it's not stupid at all to ask the weird question because we're dealing with a very bizarre case. Personally, I think all this is very unlikely. It would be a miscarriage of justice and would get appealed straight away, as it is not in line with the previous convictions related to similar offenses. So, what you're talking about has two phases, and I'm going to mention them very quickly. When you're saying miscarriage of justice, you're specifically saying that it's not quite similar to how other convictions in similar situations have been handled, and you're correct. If a lot of these things that the prosecutors have asked get accepted and the judgment is something that the judge decides to do, then it's most definitely not in line with previous convictions. Remember how I mentioned the precedent. So if it happens, while the word miscarriage of justice would not legally quite fit in because they haven't broken a law, what would fit in is a good legal ground for appeal. And the way you do that is you say exactly what you did. This particular judgment does not fit, does not have the same type of effect, does not meet the severity, or in this case, the lesser severity of the indictments. And it does not have any links to similar types of cases. Here's the precedents. So you're going to appeal by saying that, you're going to appeal by stating that you believe this was incorrect. So, not necessarily a miscarriage, because again, judges have discretion and judges do make mistakes. So, when we don't like judgments, we don't assume that the judge is biased and thus has done that. What we do realize is the judge is a human person and the judge can make mistakes. And that's what we say. This was a mistake. Here's why it's a mistake. Here's what the law says. It's incorrect. It's incorrect for all of these reasons, and it's a great ground for appeal. So I'm both agreeing with you and slightly correcting the words that would be used in the legal sense. If that makes any sense, I don't know, but agreeing and also just working on the word choices of what happens in the system when you disagree with a judgment. Is there a time frame for it, or his information will be revealed like forever? Um, the revolution of information, it depends on what exactly it is for. If it's for the minor stuff, then that should also be time limited. So the minor stuff is like I said, taking pictures, streaking in the street, writing a racy novel, prostitution for self. These are the more minor stuff. The heavier stuff is child molestation, gang rape, etc., etc. So it depends on where you fall in that chapter. Are you on the high end, the heinous crime end, or are you at the should these even be criminal offenses? Because in some jurisdictions they're not. If you're on that end, where the world cannot agree on if these should be crimes or if they should not be crimes. If you're at the end where the world has not agreed on these things being criminal in nature, then you're looking at a time limit. Absolutely, he can appeal. As I've said over and over and over again, even if the worst case scenario happens, and the worst case scenario is you get 9 guilties, even if the worst of the worst nightmare takes place, that's not the end. You appeal. Both parties have the right to appeal. So even if the best case scenario happens, and the absolute best golden scenario is not guilty on 8 and guilty on 1. If you're wondering what the 1 is, just to remind you, he's agreed that he did change 1 into casino chips, and he will be fined for that. So the best case scenario is not guilty on 8. The most likely scenario is a mixture of some guilties, some not guilties, and the main goal is a suspended sentence that protects the individual's freedom. By that, I literally mean so that he's not locked up in prison and doesn't have to ever do any kind of labor in prison. So his freedom, that's like the big fat goal in all of this that's taking place. So the ability to appeal exists. If we get a verdict that's unfavorable, we have, him and his legal team have the right to appeal. If it's favorable and the prosecution doesn't appeal, if they do, then there's obviously a next step. But if the prosecution doesn't appeal, then it's the end for us. If either team appeal, it is reviewed by the court of the second instance, which is the high court. Because SR will no longer be in the military, it will be the civilian high court that reviews the request for an. They will review it, and they will either agree that there is legal reasoning to ask for an appeal. They're not going to decide if the judgment was correct or incorrect. That's not what they're doing when they're reviewing it. They're not deciding if this is a correct judgment or incorrect judgment. They're not going to agree or disagree with the verdict or the sentencing. What they're instead judging is, are there grounds for an appeal? Is there enough legal reasoning to question the verdict and sentencing? If there is enough legal grounds, legal reasoning to throw possible doubt and question, then they will accept the appeal, and part 2 of the legal battle will begin in the high court level, the court of second instance. Similarly, at the end of the court of second instance, once a verdict comes out and a sentencing comes out, both the prosecutor and the defense have the right to appeal a second time. And if, again, it's denied, it ends there. If it is accepted, it gets put to the highest court of the law in my country as well as in South Korea. That's the Supreme Court. But just for us to have a clear idea, in the years that I've practiced law and I've watched it and I've studied the written stuff, while appeals after the court of first instances are very common from the defense, they're less common from the prosecutors. So some stats to keep in mind. On the defense team, it's very common to see appeals coming from the defense team, less common to see it from the prosecutors. Another stats to keep in mind, again, both from experience and from the studies. It's common to appeal the court of first instance and move it to the court of second instance, but it's very less common to appeal a decision at the high court level. Usually, most parties decide to accept whatever is decided at the high court. So a smaller percentages of cases are appealed at that level and moved to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court doesn't hear as many appeals because there's a smaller percentage. So hopefully that also gives you a couple of stats to keep in mind while you're reviewing that. And I'm going to again take a quick water break. And I'm also going to scroll down to make sure that you guys can still hear me, because now I'm slightly paranoid whenever my light's blinking. I randomly saw a question that says, "Thank you for staying up late with us and helping us. I'm an insomniac." I didn't used to be, but since this case started, I work in the morning. I come home, I do VLM, and I do lives wherever I can fit them into the day, and I do more VLM. I go to sleep for a couple hours at night. If I'm lucky, I get 3 solid hours. If I'm not lucky, I don't. So hello, insomnia. I will be very pleased to go back to a normal schedule. I'm glad to hear that you can hear me. As I said, I've become paranoid because my light keeps flickering. Okay, so let's go back. Okay, there's a lot more comments and questions, so bear with me as I keep going through. Okay, so this isn't related to SR, but this related to a question that somebody else asked regarding JJY, ETL means etc. For the 5 people notifications, no, not any mention of revelation of personal information only was part of the prosecution demand on them, but there's no news says that it was accepted by judges. So thank you for that to our great translator. Because you translate our news regularly, you're very up to date on all of them. So thank you very much for sharing that. So it appears that not only in other people's cases is accepting something like that out of line, but things that have taken place within the same time frame and circle of acquaintances also show that the judge did not accept certain more outlandish claims. So that's good to see. That's something that we can take as precedent, that in similar circles, different crime, let me just say that, similar circle of individuals, because they're related to each other, but different crime, very clear on this. Nowhere are these crimes that are being indicted for equal to each other at all. One group committed heinous acts, other group has been accused of things that in some countries are legal. Just so that I can say this again. Prostitution and prostitution mediation are legal in some countries, and in other countries they might not be legal, but they are decriminalized, meaning you don't get prosecuted for them. So the level is oceans apart. We want to make sure we understand that, even if we have to talk about the other group because they're similar in circle, they're oceans apart in the type of crimes and the nature and the heinousness or the lack of that in them. Okay. But you mean I will be able to know his direction if I ask who? Okay. Again, I'm not 100% certain I understand the question. By you mean direction, meaning if you ask where he lives. So what would happen is there would be you'd be able to go online and you'd be able to search for his residence. So you won't be able to track him everywhere. It's not like wearing an ankle monitor. So if you're going to your local pharmacy, everybody can go online and see, oh, he's at Walgreens or he's at CVS and it's 1 a.m. in the morning or 2:22 a.m. in the morning, he's at CVS. It's not like that. It's not going to track him in real time and let you know where he is. He's having dinner at, I don't know, one of our newly opened Korean barbecue places in DFW. It's not going to tell you that. Instead, it's going to tell you your address. They're located on such and such street. Here's the address. So, if that is what you're asking, hopefully that answered that question. It's a good question. If this process carries on past discharge, will the military court still be over it or will it go to public courts? All right, so his discharge date is coming up shortly. I cannot, again, and you're going to hear me say a lot of times when I don't have answers that I cannot. And I prefer to tell you when I cannot do something instead of guessing and just throwing out an answer, because one, that's irresponsible, and I believe I owe a certain amount of I owe something to the people, especially being the face of VLM, to be as upfront and clear and honest as I humanly can. So I don't have the exact answer to that, and this is why. This is why. I don't know when he's actually going to finish. Originally, it was set for September, but due to the coronavirus, there has been a lot of days off and vacations that individuals in the military service were unable to take. So keep in mind the September date had figured in all of that vacation and day off times. So I don't know how many of those you can minus from his original discharge date. So it depends on how many he has accumulated. If he's accumulated 20 of those days, then you minus 20 days from his current discharge date. If he's accumulated 30, you minus that. So hopefully that gives you an idea of, depending on how many days he's accumulated, is how many days early he leaves. His accumulated dates are going to not include the days that he has been in court. So keep in mind that he's had 24 hearings, and the 24th hearing had 2 days. So basically, he's been unavailable to serve for a total of 25 days. So keep that in mind as well as you're doing the arithmetic. So whatever he had accumulated does not include the fact that he had to be out of service for his court experiences. So there's a lot of math that's going to get done to determine when he comes out. But there is a high likelihood that he's scheduled to leave earlier than in September. Um, and so that's part one of my answer to you. The second part of the answer of why I'm not giving you an exact answer is because of coronavirus. This Monday in South Korea, the country was put under what we call a semi-lockdown. It is the highest level of alert that this country has been in since the beginning of the pandemic, the highest it has ever been. Supreme Court has put a hold on all ongoing court cases. And this applies to everything within the main jurisdiction of Seoul, South Korea. SR's military court falls within that regional jurisdiction. So there is, again, a high likelihood that court proceedings over there will also be halted and delayed. So how long has the Supreme Court asked? The Supreme Court has asked for about 2 weeks of a hold. So we're looking about 2 weeks. Given the fact that it's already the 15th, I'm going to assume that minus this week, since Monday that announcement came up until before Monday, the court already had several days to deliberate. They'd still not made a verdict, which again is a good sign. Having a quick verdict is not always a good sign, because sometimes it means that decisions were already made or something was so obvious that there was no need to think. So in this particular case, it taking longer was actually better, because it means that somebody is deliberating hard. Do I? Don't I? Is there? Isn't there? End result, again, you might not agree, I might not agree, but at least someone is taking the time to deliberate and not just jumping on it. So given the fact that it appears, one, that it might be delayed due to COVID, and two, that the court is taking their time to deliberate, if we take both of those into factor, there is a chance that the earliest we get a verdict is as soon as the court is able to reconvene, or if the court reconvening is no longer an issue, it could be quite soon. Or if the court continues to deliberate because they still feel that they don't have enough to make a decision immediately and they want to take more time, then there is a chance that it could go on longer. So in South Korea, a deliberation takes place in 2 ways. There is the 2 weeks, 14 days rule, and it's mostly for military cases. Now, here's where we're thrown for a loop. SR's case is taking place in the military. However, SR has not been indicted as a soldier. His indictments all come from before the time he was a soldier. So there are 2 different laws that can apply to him, meaning it can literally be a 14-day rule per military, or it could go the way it often does in general court. General courts, civilian courts, routinely take up to 1 month. It can be less, but up to a month is quite common. In extremely rare cases, and I mention that because there's always an exception to what is likely and common. So in extremely rare cases, deliberation have also taken longer than a month. And that leaves you with the reason why I have refused to give you an exact answer. There are so many circumstances to take into account that no one can give you an exact answer unless they're like talking to the judge over the phone and getting the details from them, or are psychic somehow. So forgive me for that one, but hopefully you still have enough information from my explanations that gives you a general idea of the various scenarios that could be playing out. Um, I would recommend everyone read Ein VIP's comment. I'm not going to read it out loud, mainly because I'm trying to save the time. It's now 2:30. I'm going to attempt to leave as soon as possible, so I at least get my 3 hours of sleep before work tomorrow. So please read her comment about the job restrictions and the other 5 people. Question was not for JJY, it was but the revelation of his personal information. Okay, yes, we can still hear you. So again, as I said, for anyone interested in the other cases, please read Ein's comments. Thank you for staying up late. I keep thinking about how it can be determined that he is guilty on the co-principal. I wish I knew of previous rulings on something similar and see how they can come up with that conclusion. As I said, there is nothing that is 100% similar, but there are other co-principals, like the story I told earlier about the co-principal, saved during part 1 of the live before the electricity went out on me. It is reasonable doubt. There's always opportunities for the defense to create reasonable doubt. In this particular case, it's going to be harder to do that. But just because something is harder doesn't mean it's impossible. And again, even if it's worst case scenario for this court of first instance, it's not the end. If we ever hit that junction where things have gone down the drain for the court of first instance, there is appeals still. So don't think if there's a verdict and it's really bad, it's completely unfavorable, that's the end. It is not the end. That is then the beginning of the next battle. Will we ever know what was in the written statement? The first part of that is the fact that the prosecution said they would submit something in writing and that the defense would then submit their own defense in writing. Will the media ever see what's written there? No, that will not go to the media. What you're actually talking about is in South Korea. I don't know if you caught this part before, mentioned in previous lives. Even when you argue a particular charge or have witnesses in court, what you see is just the tip of an iceberg. You always have written arguments that you present along with it. There is never a South Korean case where you don't have paper. Those paper are confidential. The court sees it, the prosecution sees it, the defense sees it. And at the end of the trial, only people who have legal reason to see it can request it. So SR will be able to request for those documents. SR's lawyer and legal team will be able to. SR's family members, his parents, his sister, if he has living grandparents, his living grandparents. South Korea also considers extended family member family with privileges. So aunts, uncles, cousins, with as far as legal rights go, because South Korea also is based on a Confucian system where society and liability to society is so important. one's boss at one's work is considered important. And so if SR was hired by, I don't know, some kind of business corporation, the CEO of that might request legally have the right to request for the written statements. So you won't see the written statements. The written statements are part of the larger file that is confidential, that only people with legal rights have access to and can request. Um, what you will see is the verdict that comes out and the explanation of the verdict. Think about the AW hearings. We saw the verdict when the judge said no twice, and we saw the legal reasoning why he said no twice. Similarly, in this time, we will see the verdict and why it's a conviction or why it's an acquittal. Okay, sorry, I don't get what you mean, that his personal information, if it's approved, will be online. I mean online where a specific page I can Google and find it in that search. Yes, Pam, that's what I mean. So there's like a database. Um, so there'll be like a directory database where you can go online and you search for a person's name and you can pull up their information. South Korea has a database like that. And South Korean citizens will be able to then search him by his name, find out his address, and what he's been convicted of. Is that a little bit more clear? I'm going to scroll down and look for your yes or no. In 1 minute, I'm going to read the question or the comment right below yours because it's answering you. Uh, and they answered whatever I said. Exactly. There's a specific website. So you go on to that database and you type exactly, exactly. Um, okay, so to bring out the second part of Pam's statement, it's not really a question, but it's a statement about seeking jobs that you need to put that down in. That's something you won't need to do in South Korea. You won't need to mention your convictions, but if your boss wants to know about them, they do have the right to ask. So while you don't have to write it down, the boss can ask, and they do a criminal background check when you're hired. So while you don't have to write it on a piece of paper, when you get a criminal background check and you're hiring, it will show. So that's something to keep in mind. So if you're applying to be a receptionist, you do a criminal background check, including drug tests as well in South Korea. That's a part of all hiring processes, whether you're hired as a receptionist or you're hired as a manager. Okay, yes, I'm glad it's kept confidential as well. So any revelations that documents will be a crime. Yes, any revelation of the package that has all those little details that I'm telling you about, that's illegal. If someone shares it publicly, it would only be SR who can get away with it. But in the time that I've practiced, and it's been a while, but obviously I'm also not that old, so I cannot, pretend to be old and gray and wise beyond my years yet. Reasonably practiced, but in that time, I haven't seen any defendant put their information out to the public. So I don't think the defendant's going to attempt to do that and say that it's my right too. I don't think that's going to happen. So okay, let's see here. Yes, it's very similar to what you have for sex offenders. Very, very similar in America. The next one is about aggravated assault. It was mentioned in the hearing that SR the one who started the conflict. Wouldn't that imply a peaceful outcome and make it less serious? This is where what I was saying earlier about the defense's job being using the witness testimonies for their defense comes into play. That's another part that the defense is going to quote to try to fight against the assumption that SR had a motivation to be happy if someone, taught that person a lesson. This is one of those things that can be used as counter argument to it. So, as you're noticing, over the course of the last two lives, there have been at least two individuals who've put out, maybe even three, I've lost count, particular parts of the hearing that actually contradict or drive holes or leave doubts as to, wait, wouldn't it? And when I keep on saying the defense's job to use the testimonies, I'm literally talking about those parts. I'm saying the defense is going to go through and fine tooth comb every single thing that has been used in the testimony, from witnesses to the defendant themselves, to argue against the prosecution's claims. And the better job the defense does, the stronger the case is. So it's really, really now a lot on how good this defense is. And I'm hoping, I'm praying that they live up to their reputation and they have a good reputation. And up until recently, I didn't really have any reason to be too nervous about it. But if they maintain their reputation and do what is expected, then they should level the playing field. Even if they don't get back an advantage, they should be able to level that playing field. But for the military documents, not the civilians. The documents that we are talking about are court cases. So yes, all of those, it doesn't matter if it's taking place in military court or in civilian court. All the court documents that are typed up by the lawyer and the prosecutor are confidential for the eyes of those with legal rights only. That's the way to remember it. Those huge packets that can sometimes be hundreds of pages are confidential for the eyes of those with legal rights only. So I think we mentioned something very similar to what you're saying. Also, off Nat's comments, the assault victim himself said that he didn't want to press charges, right? I wonder if that has bearing on the conviction or not. Somebody else actually pointed this exact same fact. I think it was during the first live on YouTube. And what I mentioned then is the same thing as I'm mentioning now, and that I mentioned to Nat's comment. These are all part of the defense's strategy to go through and use the witness statements to poke holes. So yes, that's another thing they poke holes with. But the whole case has been of public interest, especially the prosecution charges. So how can we be sure that the court documents will not be published? Genuinely asking. So you're asking, how do we know that 60, 70, 80, 90, or 100 pages of documents will not show up? Well, if they show up, that means someone from the courtroom, someone who is an officer of the law, has leaked it. So if you see pages upon pages of documents that are supposed to be confidential documents from this case in public, it means someone who is an officer of the law has leaked it. That means that person is now criminally liable and will face charges themselves and hopefully also get convicted. So the reason why it won't be leaked, why court files don't get leaked, is because it's a crime and because the only people who have access to it are people with legal rights. The prosecutor, the defense, the judge, the clerks. And if it gets leaked, you know exactly who are the people who had access to that document. You know exactly the number of people and their names with access to that document. So you can track it down and you will be held responsible. A few minutes ago, or a couple of hours ago, when I was talking about when lawyers are convicted of crimes, that they're punished more severely because we're officers of the law. Imagine a trial lawyer, whether they're a prosecutor or a defense, leaking such an information. Not only will they be prosecuted, they will never again practice law in their life. Goodbye, legal profession. Goodbye, license to practice law. That type of activity will result in the loss of their ability to practice law. If it's the judge who loses their mind and releases to the public, the judge will never be a judge again. You lose your ability to practice law if you are an officer of the law and you break the law. That is the biggest, I mean, for myself, I cannot imagine a bigger criminal offense than me subverting the law instead of upholding the law that I have sworn to uphold in a court. Also, if I am representing a person, nothing would be more condemning of myself than if I acted in a way that harmed my client. So definitely not the defense. As far as the prosecutor, I highly doubt the prosecutor wants to be imprisoned, lose their job, and then lose their license. I don't believe that SR's case is that big of a public interest that officers of the law are going to break the law to publish documents that they have a sworn duty to keep confidential. So hopefully that gives you an idea. Again, as I said, unless someone leaks it, it cannot get out. It's not like, a media is going to enter into the public records office to dig for it. They cannot quite do that. It's a secure facility where all the documents are kept, and it's not available for hacking. So if it's leaked, it's done by someone who was an officer of the court. Okay, so it's not like the media can take the physical papers of the document, scan it, publish it exactly. The media has no way to get hold of these to share it unless someone gives it to them. So unless the officers of the court leak it, as in pass it on clandestinely, illegally, committing crimes that will strip them of their license to practice, the media do not have the ability to gain access to it. What they will gain access to is only what is publicly allowed, and that gets decided in the courtroom by those in charge. Everything that we've been allowed to see so far has been things that the court has allowed to reveal to us, which is also why the recreated chat is not authentic. It is not the original. The original chat is in the hands of the court. No one has seen that one in public as of yet. Nobody on social media has seen the original because they do not have the original. The original belongs in the hands of the court. What you see is a recreation, which is an edited version, not the original. It must be kept in mind that anything related to this case, all the originals are in the hands of the court. What we are allowed to see in the media are what is allowed to us by the court. And both parties are aware of this and accepting of those. Anything that they claim is evidence, and if it's not been released by the court, it is not evidence. It is either a recreation or it's something where people are discussing possibilities, like their talk shows where you discuss all kinds of legal possibilities. It's those kind of things, but they don't equal evidence because they're not something that is original, and they have not been scrutinized through the testing of evidence process, which is done for every piece of evidence. They're forensically tested to make sure that these are reliable, credible evidence. Okay, I'm going to try again to keep scrolling. Keep in mind that it's going to be 3 o'clock. So as soon as it hits 3 a.m. in the morning, I'm going to go to bed so I can get 3 hours of sleep, which leaves me with 8 minutes of talking time, everyone. So I'm going to be very brief now. I think I've answered a lot of questions already, so I'm going to try to be extremely brief. Chain of custody, thank you for bringing that up. Okay, so what Ein and Pam are discussing, if others would like to watch, it's regarding JJY and disclosing some of those information. Ein correctly mentions that while there might be 40, 50, 60 pages of information, what you've seen is what, 2, 3, 4 pieces of information. So keep in mind that what you see is not all of it. As I've said, for every single thing, there's pages upon pages upon pages. What we see are the tip of an iceberg. So again, the question was from Pam. The answer was from Ein. There's unrelated question or comment about Lawyer Bong. Anyone interested, please read. After that, I haven't heard about him since it's been a year, but at the end of the legal document, the official, that just officials have access, but at the end, it's, okay, so Pam's asked a further question or a further statement, and Ein has done a further reply. JJ Walker Crimes List IDK 2 says KSB has committed a crime of causing the leak of the documents because we don't know till what extent and whether it is legal about what they're allowed to publish. Okay, so Pam makes a question, a legitimate question. Ein gives a really legitimate answer. The point being this. Imagine there being about 60 pages of evidence. What we've seen is 1 or 2 pages. What we do not know, because no one has told us, is how much of that information is exact copy of the original. What we do know, and we can assume, it's safe to assume in this case, you can hypothesize, have an educated guess, as opposed to pulling things from the air. So hypothesize is that whenever something is revealed, as I said, it is decided by the court that this much can be revealed, and it is known to both parties and agreed by both parties. So that means there definitely are some information and bits and pieces that can be revealed. Those are decided by the court. 60 pages of documents have not been revealed. And when I'm talking about Seungri's documents, I'm talking about however many pages there are going to be finally, probably hundreds. 24 hearings, the 24th having 2 different days. So 25 days in total. More hours than I can count. There's going to be more than 60 pages. There's going to be hundreds of pages. So if you see a 300-page book, then that's a leak. If you see 1 or 2 potential documents being shared by the news, then there's 2 potential possibilities. One, as I said, if it could be a recreation. It could be one of those discussion where you're discussing possibilities, or it could be one that comes directly from the court. If it comes directly from the court, most of the media that are covering the court case actually mention the court during those times and share those. And again, the court can choose to reveal certain information, just not 60 pages or hundreds of pages, but they can take out a piece here and a piece there. There's a very big difference between when I say confidential documents and when I say revealing pieces of information. Revealing pieces of information are possible when the court decides to do that and both parties are aware and in agreement. It happens. But that's different from releasing the entire thing, which at this point in Seungri's case, we're talking about hundreds of pages. It's not just going to be 60 page. His lawyer wrote, I think, about a 60-page rebuttal to something at the very beginning of this case. So imagine how many pages his side has now. We're talking hundreds. And then the prosecution has hundreds. So prosecution has hundreds, the defense has hundreds, and then whatever the judge writes. So unless you see a book with several hundreds of pages, then chances are it's not the document, it's not the entire document in question. Hopefully that really answers that a little bit better. Because maybe we using it is wrong. If court allowed it published, then it is legal. Correct. If anything has been allowed by the court and you're using it, it is legal. If anything has been leaked, it is illegal and it should not be used. If you don't know if it's a real document, if it's a fake document, then this is about all misinformation and all disinformation. If at any point in time people have a doubt as to the authenticity of information, the accuracy and credibility of it, if you don't know, don't share, don't like. This should be true for whatever it is, whether it is SR's case or whether this is about coronavirus and vaccination, or it is about the Texas electric grid, dear ERCOT, or not so dear ERCOT. Regardless of whatever it is, if there is information that makes you doubt if this is real, if this is reliable, if this is credible, don't share, don't like, don't engage, period. However, if you know this is released and reliable, you can use it. Hopefully that answers that. Wow, I have a whole new respect for a lawyer named that man really is working hard. Yes, that man is working very hard. That man is working really hard. That's the one thing I would say. It's 3:00, so I'm going to do my closing remarks. Firstly, I'm going to thank everyone for putting up with the technical issues. You heard me use ERCOT several times. Anyone interested, look up the Texas electric grid and how unreliable it is. So thank you for putting up with all of that today. Also, thank you for accepting the fact that I tend to stay away from a lot of the personal level discussions that VIPs tend to have. I do that on purpose because You don't come to listen to me because I'm a VIP who grew up in the YG family as a child. You come to listen to me because I'm the face of VLM, because I'm a lawyer, a practicing lawyer with experience in South Korea as well as the United States and other legal jurisdictions. You come to follow me because I can tell you exactly what the law is, how it's interpreted, why it's interpreted that way. You come to me for those information. So, especially given the fact that I'm a VIP, especially given the fact that I'm a VIP, it's more important for me than for anyone else that when I speak about the law, I stick to those facts. So I will again thank people for understanding that perspective that I bring to this, because even though this is mostly information for all of you who are VIPs, other people will be watching this too. People who are neutral, people who are not K-pop fans, people who are OT4s, people who are undecided. Also, because people in my career know I do this, I have my colleagues watching this. Those who follow me on IG know that I have our local politicians who follow me. I have my students who follow me. So it is extremely important for me to hold on to my credibility. And that means separating the fact that I am a fangirl, and behind the scenes, I may feel just as concerned and aggravated as any one of you. But on screen, that does not have a place. So thank you very much for understanding that, putting up with the fact that sometimes I give you scary news and I tell you it's still within the law. But hopefully I will continue to give you a balanced view of what the law says, so that the more you know, the better you're prepared to handle whatever the outcome is, whether that outcome is good or bad, whether that outcome leads to a conclusion or it leads to a new beginning with a second hearing that starts at a high court. Regardless of what that outcome is, my place is to give you as much of information to arm yourselves with. And I hope that regardless of if I make everyone happy or not, I can at least perform that function. And as long as I can, I will continue staying with you and doing this. So thank you very, very much. I'm going to read your last comments and then I'm going to go sleep and off to work tomorrow. Okay. Pam says, thanks. Nat says, thank you for the knowledge. Thank you. Someone tells me good night. Thank you. Yes, we do need to prepare for everything. The more aware we are, the better prepared we are for good, bad, happy, sad, or simply crazy, whatever it may be. So far, there's no criticism, objection, legal action from the court heard. That is correct. Thank you so much. And thank you as well. Good night. Peaceful sleep. Yes, I'm crossing my fingers. At least 3 hours of peaceful sleep there, please. We would be lost without you. I don't know if I actually agree with that one, mainly because in the time that I've done legal lives, even before VLM existed, I have noticed that the VIP community, even the Twitter, can jump to conclusions. In general, the VIP community is very resourceful. You do your homework. So I don't know about the lost without me part, guys. I will definitely take credit for what I do, but lost without me, I don't know. I think VIPs are extremely resourceful. You've done your homework since before VLM started. So give yourselves credit there too. And I see more. Thank you. I'm following your videos on IG, and here, since not long ago, it's been extremely educational. I also understand where he stands. That's what I like to hear, that it's educational. your professional and unbiased legal perspective is most respectful. Again, thank you for understanding that. I'm late. We'll watch replay later. Thank you. You're very welcome. I think I've read all the thank yous. So thank you guys as well, as I said, for putting up with me. And I know that it might not always sound comforting, but I just want to make sure you understand from my perspective what my duties are, what my responsibilities are as the face and the head of VLM, as well as the fact that I have real career responsibilities to make myself someone who will always be credible for you. So thank you for putting up with me, and everyone have a good night, good day, and I will see you all next time.